I'm Chris Keenan. I'm a potter and I work in South London. Today I have been throwing and turning and doing a bit of surface decoration, which are all parts of my process. So we started off throwing the rocking bowl, and for that there's about 12 ounces of clay I use, and after opening up I make a rounded base rather than a flat base, and I immediately start to throw the curve when I pull the clay up. And I just about 3-4 pulls and the clay is in the shape. I sort of soften the rim a little and just smooth the outsides, and I undercut. One of the things I always do is I always try and get a bit of dry clay at the bottom of the pot. So I take off with a needle a bit of clay right at the base, so that's something you don't have to turn off, and also it gives you something dry which to grab hold of when you lift it off the wheel. I also, for the rocking bowls and other open forms, I often put a piece of paper, little sheet of paper over the top of the rim, so that when I lift it off it doesn't distort, so it retains its shape. After turning a bevel onto the edge of the rocking bowl to just neaten it up and make it look a bit sharper, and also sort of like this, it just makes the rim look quite fine, which is a really nice thing I find. After doing that, I invert it onto a conical chuck. I'm a great fan of the clay chuck, which I find a very useful tool. And then I start to remove the clay. And one of the things that's really important is that your internal profile when you're throwing is then matched by your turning. And that's something that I've got over the years, really. It's not something that happened immediately, but you're removing enough clay so that when the pot is finished, it has a balance to it and a good weight. It's not heavy. And so that's what I'm doing, gently, gently. And quite often when I'm making them, I make them in sort of a batch of sort of like a couple of dozen. And so I start with one and I work my way down the board, come back to the first one, take a bit more off, because it's quite, as you're revealing wet clay, it's quite, it's quite soft underneath. So you move on to the next one, and then by the time you come back to the first one again, it's better. What I did then was I used a looped turning tool to create a pattern I think looks very much like waves on the sea, just by having the finished pot on the chuck and then just dragging the looped tool up and down the surface of the rocking bowl, and that creates quite a nice effect. And then, as with so many things, there are tools around in the studio, like the top of a big biro, and you can impress that into the clay, and I just use the end of a wooden tool because it's got a nice asymmetric shape to it, and I use that to impress into the clay too. Then I turned the vessels, and that's just a matter of just removing the clay, turning the bevel on the edge again, sharpen up, make it look a bit lighter really. And then I turn a foot on my pots, and if I can demonstrate here, I turn a foot because it gives you somewhere to end the clay, and also it's sort of the foot that will be glazed, but you're making life easy for yourself when you're glazing through your turning. That's an important thing for me too. Once I'd turned the vessels, I dipped them into a jug of water. I dipped them twice because they were a bit hard and they needed softening twice. And then I struck them with my throwing stick quite severely. I knocked something over once and it hit the rim of the pot, and I thought, oh no, that's a shame. But ultimately, that led to other ideas. So it's the thing about being watchful about what you do and remembering that everything can have a positive side to it. The good thing about breaking a pot is that it reveals to you how well you've thrown and turned it. And this was a rocking bowl that broke. And this, I was very pleased obviously when it came out like this, because it just shows that my internal profile matches my outside external profile when I turned it off, which means the pot has balance, and you always learn something even when you break something. There are always lessons from breakages. The other thing I demonstrated this afternoon was my slip writing, and for that I have slip, and it's in a very, very narrow nozzled slip trailer, which requires quite a lot of pressure, and the slip has to be sort of at the right thickness because you don't want it to blur completely. You want it to be slightly brown and pronounced on the pot so that glaze will fall either side of it, and the glazes I use fall either side of it, so you get sort of like a relief pattern, and it's random, but it alludes to a sort of script you know, not necessarily a Western script, but that's going on with it too, so I demonstrated that as well. Writing in the air, it flies through the air and wraps itself around the pot. I like repetition. It's important in my work. The re-examination of form through doing it time and time again is very important. By going back to a form that you've thrown before, for me it's quite a good way of judging how my throwing is, because you can do more with the same amount of clay as you get better. And the clay's in the right place rather than all at the bottom or all at the top. It's, yeah, things in rows, that makes me happy.